Hey guys, what's up? After a week off, I had no voice last week. We're back to talk about Season 2, Episode 9, Nailed, of Better Call Saul. But because we weren't here last week, we're going to have to kind of go back and forth between this episode and last to explain a few things. This episode starts with Mike out in the desert laying down a spike strip. From last week, the open showed the ice cream man coming through the border crossing, and you knew that he had drugs and or money on the truck. And so this kind of calls back to the last episode. You also, at the end of last episode, saw Mike making the spike strip. So, with the open, Mike puts his spike strip to use, flattens the tires on the ice cream truck, holds up the guy driving the truck, makes his way around, and steals money from the tires. What we later find out to be $250,000.
It's a lot of money.
Nice score, Mike. Now, I'm sure they'll resolve this later. My thinking, and we'll get into it a little more, I think that money's going to end up going to the family of the Good Samaritan. Because otherwise, this pretty much solves all of Mike's money troubles. It's $250,000. If he keeps it, he's good. And the events of Breaking Bad where he needed money for Kaylee don't happen.
Well, I mean, $250,000 will only take you so far for so long, you know.
True, but, I mean, he seems pretty poor. Even when we pick him up later.
I see what you mean.
I'm not thinking he's keeping this money. We next jump over to Chuck getting ready to go to court for Mesa Verde. He is going to go in and get a notice of intent for them to open a new branch. Now, once again, calling back to last episode, Chuck was down. Jimmy went in and helped him out by doctoring some of his documents. So we know going into this that whatever Chuck has planned for the court is going to fail because of Jimmy.
Chuck doesn't know that he doctored the documents, of course.
Of course. As expected, they go in and things go very awry. Jimmy made it really simple, though. He just transposed some numbers on an address, so it could look like human error. As a result of this, Mesa Verde ends up going back to Kim for their business, and Chuck is not happy. He looks a little pissed. We go to a shot of Chuck sitting at home, where you can kind of see the light bulb come on and he realizes that Jimmy screwed him over. We then join Mike in progress as he's spying on Hector once again. Through the window, we see Hector getting very upset, and then, for just a moment, it looks like he's going to have that stroke that ended up putting him in the chair, but then he took some medication. We then get our first real big Easter egg of the episode. We flash over to Mike in a unnamed bar, but it is the exact same bar that is in Season 4, Episode 2, of Breaking Bad, 38 Snub. It's the bar that Walter meets Mike in, trying to convince him to help go against Gus. You can pull up a photo comparison online, and yeah, it's the exact same bar, the exact same stools, exact same signs. Pretty cool. Now, here is a question of this episode you and I watched together. Mike ends up buying a round for the entire house. Was this just Mike somehow celebrating his little win? Or was this Mike, for some reason, trying to draw attention to himself for having money?
I think it was him. I think it was him celebrating the win.
See, that's really, to me, out of character for Mike. I think for some reason, he was wanting to get someone's attention that he took that money.
That would make sense.
It's still open for debate. It does open him up, if they figure out it was him, to having Hector go back after his granddaughter again. So I don't know what game he's playing there. Next, we're with Kim and Jimmy as they're fixing up the dentist office. This has nothing to do with the plot, but they probably carried out $20,000, $30,000 worth of dental equipment. If they were smart, they're going to sell those chairs, get some of that rent money back. Like I said, had nothing to do with the plot. At this point, Kim gets a call from Mesa Verde, from her friend Paige at Mesa Verde, to learn that she got the job back. Shortly after hanging up and being happy for maybe 2 minutes, she gets a call from Ernesto. Now we all know where this is going. We then cut to Jimmy at a playground with the film students. Now this is the second episode in a row. Last episode they were at the airbase.
With a fake veteran.
With a fake veteran trying to get some film for a commercial in front of Fifi. This week they're in front of a school trying to get more footage for another commercial. So he's stocking up the commercials. I believe he said this one was going to air during Diagnosis Murder, following his theme of old people solving crime shows that old people watch. Previously, he had inserted a commercial in Murder, She Wrote. Now it's Diagnosis Murder, a bad procedural with Dick Van Dyke. Couple teachers come out, and you have a little bit of back and forth where he doesn't have a permit. He whips out some lie about Rupert Holmes, the guy that sings Pina Colada, having gone to school there. Hilarity ensues. Next clip. Now, we get our second 2 big Easter eggs in one episode, and they're both involving Mike. Mike is back at the diner talking to the waitress, Fran, who offered to let Mike shovel her driveway, if you know what I mean. It just so happens that Fran is the same waitress in the same booth that appears in Season 5, Episode 2 of Breaking Bad, Madrigal. It's Lydia gives her a bunch of crap for not having stevia on the table. So we get 2 Breaking Bad Easter eggs in one episode. We now cut to Nacho meeting Mike in an undisclosed location. They're good at those undisclosed locations. This whole thing is kind of odd because Nacho works for Hector. He only wanted Tuco out of the way. Initially is how this whole thing started. But now he's meeting Mike to kind of just to see if Mike was the one that stole the $250,000, and he seems okay with it. He seems okay with Mike stealing that much money from his boss like it was no problem. The only thing he took issue with was Mike's reason for doing it, wanting to bring the police in, which would then put the police in turn on Nacho. He had some problems with that,
Yeah.
Which I can't say I blame him. It's just hard. Nacho's hard to pin down. His motivations are hard.
Maybe he has some kind of respect for Mike.
I think he does have a respect for Mike, and I think somehow in the back of his mind, he thinks that Mike may be the key to blowing everything up and putting Nacho in control of everything. Through their back and forth, it's revealed to Mike that his actions ended up getting a Good Samaritan killed. Guy had stopped off to help the ice cream truck driver, and he got shot in the face and buried in the desert. So now Mike was kind of evening the score, I believe, because they threatened his granddaughter. He now has this hanging over his head that his actions has gotten someone else killed.
Which he could have just avoided all this and, laid low and took the money and, not try and make a big scene about it. And...
Yeah, but nonetheless, he still got that guy killed. And Mike is the type of guy that puts those kind of burdens on his back. He doesn't take it lightly. I think this may even push him further now to go even further after Hector. And I will be very surprised that Hector ending up in that wheelchair if it's not a result of something Mike has done or does to him. Because I don't recall any back and forth between Mike and Hector on Breaking Bad. They seem to be separated. I don't remember them ever running into each other.
It's a pretty interesting thing, though, that Mike ends up working for Gus, which Gus ends up, is really against Hector. So he kind of ends up ultimately against Hector again. That's
a good point, and maybe that is why he went to work for Gus, and maybe that's the introduction to Gus, is him seeking to work against Hector, even at the cost of his humanity, because he's pretty pissed off at Hector. There was a scene earlier that I skipped over so I could tie it all into one big scene. When they were in the dentist office and Ernesto called to have Kim come over and pick up the documents, she brings Jimmy along. At that point, Chuck confronts Kim and Jimmy about the fact that he thinks Jimmy did something to the documents. And for my mind, this is proof positive that if you have a good script and good actors, you can make anything interesting. It was basically 3 people standing in a room arguing for 7 or 8 minutes. And it was as good as anything they've done on the show, I felt, in the 2 seasons. It was just as interesting. You got to see Chuck start to unravel a little bit because he had no proof, but he knew he was right. And the whole time, Kim knows he's right. It was kind of like one big shell game.
She didn't let on.
She didn't let on, and she couldn't let on because, of course, then he would have had a leg to stand on to get her disbarred. Her punching Jimmy when they get back in the car was enough for you to know. And like I told you then, Jimmy can never tell her. She can never know. Now, we get back to the point after the Mike scenes where they're in bed together. And she very wisely just tells him without telling him that he needs to go and make sure that he's dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's because Chuck is the kind of guy that wouldn't stop. So this puts the thought in Jimmy's head that he needs to go to the copy place and make sure that he's not going to be identified. Sure enough, he pulls up. Who's there but Ernesto? So Jimmy waits until Ernesto leaves and then runs in to speak with Flance. the man behind the counter. He pays off Lance. He pays him $500 to forget that he was there, and an additional $200 to get rid of the videotape. Lance takes the money, says that he will do that, and now Jimmy knows that Ernesto has gone to get Chuck. Chuck's going to be back any moment. So Jimmy's standing across the street watching Chuck try to get this man to admit that he recognizes the picture of Jimmy. This goes on for several minutes, and Chuck really begins to unravel. You get some cool, like, interspersements. It looks like Chuck has taken quite a bit of hallucinogens of some sort. In some places, you know, to get the experience Chuck was having, people would have to pay big money. But it goes on for a few more moments. Chuck finally unravels, and then at a point, he kind of passes out and hits his head very hard on a counter.
Bounces right off, and he falls over.
If it wasn't for the coming attractions that shows him in the hospital in the next episode, I might have believed Chuck was dead, because he took a pretty hard shot and he wasn't moving.
He did.
But this leaves Jimmy with a real dilemma. He's watching from across the street as his brother is in real bad condition. And Lance, who we've established isn't a brain surgeon, and Ernesto, who doesn't seem to be much smarter, are just standing there not calling 911. So now does Jimmy call 911, or does he let his brother possibly die? If he calls 911, he's really screwed, because that links him to the copy machine place. Although, you know, at this time, Jimmy never seems to have a problem finding a payphone. So why he's not running around looking for a payphone, at least, is beyond me.
Well, I'm sure they're going to call the cops eventually. They're not just going to stand there and gawk at it.
Yeah, but if it's somebody you cared about and you're watching from a distance and they're not calling the cops every minute or every second, it's a little bit agonizing. I got to say, my only thought on this is, my stake watching it, I don't want Chuck to die for Jimmy's sake, because I don't want Jimmy to have to carry that around. Personally, Chuck's an asshole, and if he just died right there, I'd be like, good.
Good, yeah.
Good. So yeah, I want Chuck to live purely so Jimmy doesn't have to carry that weight.
Makes sense.
Screw Chuck. He's a bastard. Cranky old bastard. All right. As you can see, voice is going out. Sorry we missed last week. First time we've missed it forever. Much hit everything there was to hit over last week, though. I mean, it was a good episode. Wasn't the best. Couldn't really find any Easter eggs last week. So going into this week, what grade do you give episode 9, Nailed?
94.
94? I'm going to go this far with it. I'm going to give it a 98. My favorite episode of the season so far.
Wow.
Probably maybe like my third favorite episode ever. I haven't enjoyed an episode this much since they were in the desert with Tuco.
Oh,
way back in season 1.
Yeah.
And he broke the legs.
That was like the third episode, wasn't it?
It's been a minute. Yeah. They built this episode so well that like it felt tense throughout the episode. It felt like everything mattered, even when they're just sitting in Chuck's den arguing.
It was worth the couple like slow episodes throughout the season of this season.
I really look forward to next week, although I'm very afraid that Jimmy's going to end up losing his license over this. Screw you, Chuck. Until next week, thanks for watching. Stay vigilant.